Now folks say there's no place quite like the Autumn Kingdom, and I reckon they're right. All around you've got those amber leaves blowing in the breeze, the smell of wood smoke curling from every chimney, and the taste of spiced cider never far from your lips. It's a land where the days are warm and golden, and the nights are crisp enough for a good heavy quilt. A simple life, some might say, but it's a life that suits a fella like me just fine. My name's Zachney, born and raised in the city, but who now lives here, in Wattlesquash. It's a quiet, humble town, nestled on a cozy hill in the West Kingdom. A place that has everything a pumpkin would need: a busy little mill, a wonderfully cozy church, and even a little bookstore down the cobblestone road from my own cottage. And, truth be told, I spend more time there these days than most, and in fact, that's where this story begins. It was an ordinary day in February when I first rolled into Wattlesquash. I had come here simply for curiosity's sake, having heard more about the village in recent months. Needing respite from the cold, I was drawn to a quaint bookseller's shop near the edge of town. The creak of floorboards underfoot, the smell of aged paper in the air. It was a welcoming establishment. Before long, I found myself perusing the volumes. Not looking for anything in particular, of course, but that's when something caught my eye. It was tucked between two larger volumes, weathered, leather-bound, and humble. No title on the cover. I picked it up, curious-like, and found it to be the journal of a woman named Mie Dalebean. Now, I didn't know who she was at the time, but I soon found out she had quite the story to tell. 17th of September, 419. Journal of Mie Dalebean. Today I begin a journal in the hopes of recording my life in a fashion that may be of interest to those who stumble upon my writings in the future, including myself. It is so terribly easy to forget the mundane actions that get us through our days, and by doing this, I hope to put that fear of mine to rest. Today, I am resting comfortably in a merchant's homestead. They've been very kind and have agreed to put me and Y-Bend up for a while. I'm hoping that the pup doesn't cause too much trouble for our hosts. He can be a handful at times, but I do love him so. Tomorrow, I will leave town for a while and go on a hunt. Food stores are getting rather low, and we have only a few meager shreds of rabbit meat left. I kept reading, entry after entry, and the story grew. Ms. Dalebean wasn't just another hunter from a small town. She was a soul restless for something more, for adventure, for freedom. She and Y-Bend roamed the outskirts, venturing farther each day. 22nd of September, 419. Journal of Mie Dalebean. Another freezing morn, and yet again Y-Bend was put out in the night. My hosts are gracious for letting us stay, but I'm beginning to think we aren't truly welcome. Towards noon, I wandered to the northern edge of town, to the old trenches. I'll admit to getting a shiver up my vines every time I near this place, and didn't stay for all too long. One thing I did notice, however, was the old trench tower. It has always been there, looking over town, but never have I ventured within. Doing so, I found it rather spacious, and in surprisingly good condition. This old trench tower will make for a fine sanctuary for Y-Bend and I this evening, and with a little work, it may serve us beyond the singular night even. Mie and her pup, Y-Bend, eventually made the tower their home, and from the sounds of it, and judging by the included photos, it seemed a wonderful little home indeed. 13th of October, 419. Journal of Mie Dalebean. Mornings have been made much more comfortable since getting that food from town, and the new clothing has made it much better still. Decided to stay in today and do some bone carving, as the weather was still unsettled. I was prepared to be amused by my poor whittlings, but ended up fairly satisfied with the results. Made a couple statuettes today of Mengfor, pumpkin heads, and some ghastly beasts. And one more of a hero, Stir Workwrights. Mom used to say he was a long-lost relative of ours who fought in the Bogey Wars long ago. I hope he found a good spot in Mengfor's patch. Ms. Dalebean and Y-Bend lived in that tower for quite some time, contentedly too, hunting through the hills, venturing to nearby villages, and enjoying the kingdom's bounty, until a day came when things changed. 27th of October, 419. Journal of Mie Dalebean. I am utterly distraught. He was there one moment, and then the next was gone. I searched high and low around our tower and the surrounding woods. Spent the entire day searching, till freezing night. He's still out there. Wybend was gone, and as I read on, Mie's tale turned from a story of quiet longing to one of sadness and struggle. She described her frantic, week-spanning search through the wilds in varying detail. 6th of November, 419, Journal of Mie Dalebean. I don't think there's much to do about my friend. I wouldn't doubt that he wandered off and was scooped up by some wandering traveler. He was so kind, so friendly. He always loved new faces. I just am really hoping whoever made off with him is treating him well. They must be. But as the days passed and hope withered, a growing urge to travel, or flee, perhaps, began to take place of grief. Ms. Dalebean left the tower behind and began to search the east wilderness. 12th of November, 419, Journal of Mie Dalebean. Had the life scared out of me by a giant bat this morn. It came at me quickly, but I was able to lose it in the woods, thank Mengfor. Later on in the day, I encountered a ridge of stone jutting from the landscape. It had a deep pocket that seemed to lead deeper still, but I had no interest in being killed today. 18th of November, 419, Journal of Mie Dalebean. Traveled far today and was glad for it. Went east, trying to avoid the salt lands, but they were quite expansive. Crossed around the north and ran across a giant bat. Dangerous monster. I fell to the ground and waited for it to pass. It gave me no trouble, thank Mengfor. By nightfall I found a good copse of trees and made a nest for myself within, hoping I am far enough away from those dangerous salt lands and those king pumpkins. Farther and farther she went, away from the gentle pumpkin lands of the west and deep into the eastern wilds. The perils were great, and her grief greater still, but as she grew weary, the urge to settle began to coalesce. 10th of December, 419, Journal of Mie Dalebean. Packed up Clarley and went east again along the brook we camped near. Again, I must express my growing respect for her speed and gentle demeanor, though she is no Wybend. Spent most of the day trekking back over the previous day's path, back to an isolated nook at the mountain's foot I recall passing. Thinking of constructing a small home here at the mountain's foot. Maybe live here a bit, do some hunting perhaps. I do think this wild living will do us some good. Mengfor bless this little site. Mie had found herself a horse in the human lands, and she and her steed began construction of a home, far, far away, nestled in the mountains. What a lonely existence to live. 1st of January, 420, Journal of Mie Dalebean. A new year is upon us. I do not think I would have realized it if I wasn't maintaining this journal. Still feeling a tad dejected today. We worked a sensible bit on the house, not too much. I wonder what this year's end will bring. What will this little homestead look like? I should hope it'll be completed by then. Through her optimism, I could feel isolation in her words. The deeper she went into the wilds, the farther she seemed to drift from the warmth of home. She was alone, save for Clarley. I'll admit I began to worry about how this tale might end. 4th of January, 420, Journal of Mie Dalebean. I woke this morning, and while I was getting up, noticed a fat skunk right outside the barn. Truly starting to understand the scope of this project now. Have a few weeks left if I work straight through. A month maybe if I continue getting distracted. Worked a bit longer today. 10 hours. I would like to take a day or two to cut down some more trees and make room for a fence. We'll need more timbers anyways. 6th of January, 420, Journal of Mie Dalebean. Was a good day today, plain but calm. Set about working on the house again. I really am quite eager to have it finished. Worked for 8 hours, enough where my body starts feeling the strain. I was reading, affixed to the pages. I had to know what happened to Miss Dalebean. The entries continued on, as did her progress. 9th of January, 420, Journal of Mie Dalebean. Felt rejuvenated this morn, and the weather was fine. Worked on the homestead for a long while, and managed to finish up the ground floor. More excited about it all than I have been. Still a way to go with it though. Even the mundane days drew me in. I pored over the words. It was as if I was on the same journey of discovery. 11th of January, 420, Journal of Mie Dalebean. I woke worn, but trying to push away the soreness. Set my mind to working on the homestead and did so for much of the day. Ate and drank well while I worked. Rain rolled in towards the end and forced me to quit, for the best. Thinking about maybe trying to get an instrument of some kind. Would have to head back to town for a while, but the wilds beyond are filled with danger. And then, something unexpected. Horror. Not in any transcribed event from the life of Mie, but instead, the lack thereof. That was it. The remaining pages were blank. All of them. The journal ended without warning. No grand conclusion. No final thoughts. Just silence. And it bothered me. Truly. What had become of Mie Dalebean? I couldn't leave it be. There was something in her story that stuck with me, and so I decided I too would venture east, find that cabin, and see what had happened to Mie. The woods were just as she described, dense, dark, and full of whispers. I half expected to see one of those giant spiders come crawling out from behind a tree. The mountains loomed over me, casting their shadows and leering ominously. I was growing near, but I was no journey-worn pumpkin, just a simple city gourd. And still, as hope dwindled, I came upon a rocky nook in the mountains, a tumble of stone amongst the shadowed trees. There, too, I found the cabin, just as described in the diary, but with a missing element. It was empty, abandoned, no sign of Mie or her steed anywhere. The place looked lived in, but not recently. The hearth was cold, the bed unmade, and spiders strung their silken homes high in the rafters. I searched the grounds, called out her name, but all I received in response was the rushing crisp of fallen leaves, and, so dejected, I returned to the west, to Wattle Squash, heavy with the thought that perhaps something terrible had happened to that wayward adventurer, Mie Dalebean. The only question whose answer seemed even mildly attainable now was regarding the journal itself. How had Mie's diary come to be in this little bookshop so far away? Returning to the store, I was surprised to find an easy answer to every question I had. Now, where did you get that old thing? It took me a moment to realize what she was talking about, but then I realized her eye holes were fixed upon the journal. That's when I recognized her. Mie Dalebean herself, purveyor of books in the humble town of Wattle Squash. Oh, the journal, she said, laughing as if it were nothing. I must have gotten bored of it and stopped writing. The wilds weren't for me after all. Not all the time, anyways. I was stunned. I had expected danger, disaster, maybe even tragedy. But Mie had simply decided that the wilderness wasn't where she belonged. She found her place back here in Wattle Squash, tending to books instead of fighting off the dangers of the autumn wilds. We sat and talked for hours, sharing stories, laughing about the adventures we had, and how I had come across her journal. And of course we talked about Clarley the horse and her dear lost friend Wybend as well. Though Mie had left those wilds behind, I could see that the loss of Wybend still weighed heavily on her. I asked if she ever wondered what happened to him, if maybe she hoped that he would come back someday. But Mie simply smiled and wistfully uttered something I'll never forget. No, I've made my peace with it. Losing Wybend was hard, but out there in the wilderness, I found Clarley. She's not Wybend, and she could never be, but she's her own creature, fierce and loyal, in her own way. I don't need to replace what I've lost. I have found something different to love. It struck me then how true that was. Sometimes the answers we seek come in time, while others are just never to be found. And so, just like that, life goes on. Mie found her way to Wattle Squash, and I reckon I did too. Now I visit her at her bookstore very often. We talk about the wild sometimes, but mostly these days we just talk about the quiet joys of life. New books, good company, and the warmth of a community that cares for its own. Clarley is still with her, strong as ever, and though she's not Wybend, Mie's bond with that horse has grown deeper than I think even she expected. Sometimes love isn't about replacing what's gone, but about finding something new and learning to care for it just as deeply. As for me, I'll always have a place here in the Autumn Kingdom, where the fires burn bright and the days are painted in shades of gold and rust. Good night, my friends. May the warmth of autumn keep you safe till morning.